What if I told you that 146 people died not because of an accident, but because their employers deliberately chose profit over human life? What if the doors that trapped these workers weren't locked by chance, but as part of a calculated security protocol? What if one of America's most devastating industrial tragedies was actually a premeditated crime disguised as negligence? Today, we'll uncover the sinister truth behind the Triangle Shirtwaist factory fire, a story where greed wore the mask of business efficiency, and where 146 names became eternal witnesses to corporate murder. After this introduction, tell me, from what location are you listening to me? Share with me where you're watching this story that forever changed American labor laws. In the heart of Manhattan's Greenwich Village, where cobblestone streets echoed with the dreams of thousands of immigrants, stood a 10-story brick monument to American industrial ambition. The Ash Building, rising like a fortress against the March sky of 1911, housed more than just machinery and fabric. It contained the hopes and desperation of an entire generation seeking the promised American dream. But on this particular Saturday afternoon, March 25th, what appeared to be a symbol of opportunity would reveal itself as a carefully constructed death trap, where every safety measure had been systematically dismantled in the name of efficiency and control. Among the figures who frequented that region stood out a 31-year-old woman, thin with penetrating eyes, and always dressed simply but elegantly. Frances Perkins worked as executive secretary of the New York Consumers League, an organization dedicated to improving working conditions. Her position gave her limited access to circles of power, but her training in social economics and her sharp analytical capacity made her an exceptional observer of social injustices. Frances had grown up in a middle-class family in Boston, but chose to dedicate her life to the workers' cause. She intimately knew the precarious conditions of garment factories, had documented labor violations, and tried with limited resources to pressure for changes through reports and petitions that rarely reached the desks of true decision-makers. That Saturday afternoon, March 25th, Frances was visiting a friend who lived near Washington Square Park. It was an unusually warm day for the season, and she decided to walk through the village streets, observing the typical weekend movement in the area. On the 10th floor of the Ash Building, two men supervised their textile empire with the confidence of those who had built one of New York's most profitable businesses. Max Blank, 42 years old, was known as the King of Shirtwaists. Tall, with a well-trimmed mustache and always dressed in expensive suits, he projected the image of a successful businessman. His partner, Isaac Harris, 48 years old, was shorter and more robust, with a more reserved personality, but equally determined to maximize the profits of the Triangle Shirtwaist factory. Blank and Harris were respected figures in New York's business community. They had transformed Triangle into a model operation of industrial efficiency, employing about 500 workers, mainly young Italian and Jewish immigrants. The factory produced thousands of blouses per week, meeting the growing demand for modern women's clothing. The two partners were members of the Women's Garment Manufacturers Association and frequently cited in the press as examples of entrepreneurs who offered work opportunities for newcomers to America. They maintained elegant offices, participated in charity dinners, and were seen as pillars of New York's Jewish business community. The Triangle Shirtwaist factory functioned as a microcosm of American industrial exploitation of the early 20th century. The 3 floors of the factory housed hundreds of sewing machines operated by young women, many of them teenagers who had recently arrived from Italy, Russia, and Eastern Europe. The 8th floor concentrated fabric cutting and preparatory work. Enormous tables occupied almost the entire space, covered by layers of cotton and silk fabric. Scraps accumulated on the floor, creating a flammable carpet that was rarely removed. The windows remained closed most of the time to prevent air currents from dispersing the paper patterns. The 9th floor was the heart of production, where 240 sewing machines operated in tight rows. The workers, seated on backless stools, bent over their machines for 12 to 14 hours daily. The noise was deafening, and ventilation was practically non-existent. Cotton threads floated in the air like snow, creating a dense and suffocating atmosphere. The 10th floor housed the administrative offices, meeting rooms, and finishing departments. It was here that Blank and Harris spent their days, isolated from the heat and noise of the lower floors by solid wood doors and thick carpets. The factory operated under a rigid control system, that reflected the industrial mentality of the era. Workers entered and exited through a single door, where a guard checked their bags to prevent fabric theft. During working hours, exit doors remained locked, a common practice justified by the need to prevent theft and control productivity. The fire escapes, theoretically a safety measure, were actually fragile and poorly designed structures. The main staircase, located on the exterior of the building, ended at the second floor, forcing anyone using it to jump the last meters to the interior courtyard. Additionally, the passage to this escape was frequently blocked by boxes and equipment. The workers received miserable wages, between $6 and $10 per week, and were fined for minor infractions like arriving late, talking during work, or damaging fabrics. Many supported entire families with these wages, sending money to relatives in Europe, or contributing to family income in overcrowded tenements of the Lower East Side. Triangle's workforce was composed mainly of young immigrants between 16 and 25 years old. Many had arrived in the United States with their families, fleeing poverty and persecution in Europe. Others were orphans or had come alone, seeking independence and opportunities that didn't exist in their countries of origin. These young women represented a transitional generation, no longer confined to traditional feminine roles, but still vulnerable to exploitation in a system that valued profit above human dignity. They dreamed of marriages, education for their children, and a better life than what they had left behind. Among them was Rose Friedman, 18 years old, who had emigrated from Ukraine with her family 2 years earlier. Rose worked on the 9th floor and sent half her salary to help bring her younger brothers to America. There was also Catherine Maltese, 39 years old, one of the older workers, who supported 2 small children after her husband's death in a work accident. New York in 1911 was a city of extreme contrasts. While industrial magnates built mansions on Fifth Avenue and attended operas at the Metropolitan, hundreds of thousands of immigrants lived in deplorable conditions in Lower East Side tenements. The Triangle Shirtwaist factory was a symbol of this disparity, a profitable business built on the exploitation of a vulnerable workforce. The labor movement was gaining strength, but still faced fierce resistance from employers and conservative public opinion. The 1909 shirtwaist makers' strike, known as the Uprising of the 20,000, had mobilized thousands of textile workers, but resulted in limited improvements. Many factories, including Triangle, had resisted demands for better working conditions and fairer wages. Frances Perkins had closely followed this strike, documenting the conditions that led to the protest and the tactics used by employers to break the movement. She knew that Triangle represented everything wrong with the American industrial system: the prioritization of profit over human safety, the exploitation of vulnerable workers, and the absence of effective regulations. That afternoon of March 25th, as Frances walked through the streets near Washington Square, she couldn't imagine that she was about to witness an event that would forever change her life and the course of American labor history. The Ash Building rose silently against the blue sky, its upper floors full of young women who worked even on Saturdays, taking advantage of every hour of natural light to increase their productivity. The sewing machines hummed in constant rhythm, fabric scraps accumulated on the floor, and doors remained locked, a routine that repeated day after day, week after week, in a dangerous dance between efficiency and negligence that was about to have devastating consequences. It was approximately 4:40 p.m. when Max Planck made a decision that would seal the fate of 146 people. On the 10th floor, he observed through his office window the Saturday afternoon movement in Washington Square. The workers on the 9th floor were about to end their shift. Saturdays ended earlier at 5 p.m., a concession that Blank and Harris made sure to highlight as proof of their generosity. Blank called Samuel Bernstein, the 9th floor supervisor, for a quick conversation. "Samuel," he said, adjusting his starched shirt cuffs, "we will implement today the new security protocol we discussed last week. From now on, all exits must be checked twice before closing. We cannot allow more material losses." The security protocol was, in reality, an even more rigid exit control system. In addition to the already monitored main door, Blank ordered that the 9th floor exit door to the east staircase be locked with a padlock during working hours. The official justification was to prevent theft, but the reality was that some workers had been seen leaving a few minutes before the official time, and this was unacceptable for Triangle's efficiency standards. Frances Perkins was sitting on a bench in Washington Square Park, enjoying the afternoon sun and watching children play, when she noticed something unusual. She knew Triangle's routine well. She had spent months studying working conditions at the factory as part of her research on labor violations. Normally, on Saturdays, she could see some workers leaving the building around 4:30 p.m., taking advantage of small breaks or finishing specific tasks early. But that day there was no movement at all. The windows of the 8th and 9th floors remained closed, and no female figures could be seen on the external fire escapes, where some workers usually took fresh air during quick breaks. Frances consulted her pocket watch, 4:45. Something was different. She had documented in her reports that Triangle maintained questionable worker control practices, but had never witnessed such complete isolation. It was as if the workers had been sealed inside the building. At 4:45 p.m., on Triangle's 8th floor, a small fire began in a trash can near the cutting tables. The official version was never completely established, but surviving witnesses reported that someone had discarded a still-lit cigarette or match among fabric scraps that had been accumulating for days. The fire spread with terrifying speed. The cotton and silk scraps, dry and impregnated with machine oil, functioned as perfect fuel. In seconds, flames jumped from trash cans to tables covered with fabric, and from there to the wooden structures supporting the equipment. Louis Brown, one of the 8th floor cutters, was the first to shout, "Fire!" He tried to extinguish the initial flames with water buckets, but the fire had already spread beyond any manual control. The sprinkler system, which should have been activated automatically, failed completely. It would later be discovered that the sprinklers hadn't worked for months, and Blank and Harris knew this. On the 9th floor, workers initially didn't perceive the danger. The noise of sewing machines muffled screams coming from the lower floor, and smoke hadn't yet risen in sufficient quantity to be noticed. It was Saturday afternoon, and many were anxious to finish their quotas and go home. Dinah Lifshitz, 19 years old, was one of the first to perceive the smell of smoke. She rose from her machine and looked toward the stairs, where a grey mist was beginning to form. "Smoke!" she shouted in Yiddish, her native language. Other workers began to raise their heads, interrupting the constant rhythm of their machines. It was then that the first tongue of fire appeared in the elevator opening. The fire had risen through the elevator shafts like through a chimney, fed by the air current circulating between floors. In seconds, flames began to lick the edges of the 9th floor windows. Samuel Bernstein, following Blank's orders, had implemented the new security protocol with military efficiency. The east door of the 9th floor was locked with a padlock, and he kept the key in his pocket. When panic began and workers ran toward the exits, they encountered an insurmountable barrier. "The door is locked!" shouted Rose Friedman, desperately pushing the handle. Other workers crowded behind her, pushing and screaming in a mixture of English, Italian, and Yiddish. The narrow corridor transformed into a death trap, with dozens of young women trapped between the advancing fire and a door that wouldn't open. Bernstein, perceiving the gravity of the situation, desperately tried to find the key in his pockets, but panic and dense smoke made any coordinated movement almost impossible. When he finally found the key, his hands trembled so much that he couldn't insert it into the lock. From Washington Square Park, Frances Perkins saw the first flames appear in the 8th floor windows. Initially, she thought it was just the reflection of the setting sun, but when smoke began to emerge in dense clouds, she understood the magnitude of what was happening. Frances ran toward the Ash building, joining a crowd that was beginning to form on the street. She could hear screams coming from the upper floors, but what shocked her most was the absence of any organized evacuation movement. There were no workers leaving the building, no emergency sirens, and the fire escapes remained empty. "Why aren't they coming out?" she asked a policeman who had arrived at the scene. The policeman just shook his head, equally perplexed. Frances, with her experience in investigating labor conditions, immediately understood that something was fundamentally wrong with Triangle's safety procedures. On the 10th floor, Max Blank and Isaac Harris were alerted about the fire around 4:50 p.m. They had direct access to the roof through a private staircase in their offices and managed to evacuate quickly along with their family members who were visiting the factory that day. Blank even telephoned the fire department, but made no effort to alert workers on lower floors or to ensure that exits were unobstructed. Meanwhile, on the 9th floor, fire had spread with devastating fury. The sewing machines, powered by leather belts and lubricated with flammable oils, transformed into torches. Cotton threads suspended in the air caught fire instantly, creating a rain of sparks that ignited everything around. Workers who managed to reach the west staircase discovered it was blocked by boxes and equipment, a clear violation of safety codes that Blanc and Harris knew about, but chose to ignore to maximize production space. At 4:55 p.m., just 10 minutes after the fire began, the situation had become desperate. Workers trapped on the 9th floor faced an impossible choice: die burned or jump from windows to certain death on the pavement 9 floors below. Frances Perkins, now positioned directly in front of the building, witnessed the moment when the first young woman appeared at a 9th floor window. She was a girl of no more than 18 years, with her dress on fire, looking down with an expression of absolute terror. The crowd on the street screamed for her not to jump, but the flames behind her made any hesitation impossible. "They're trapped," Frances murmured, the realization hitting her like a punch to the stomach. "The doors are locked. They're completely trapped." It was at this moment that Frances understood she wasn't just witnessing an industrial accident, but the direct result of a system that prioritized control and profit over human life. Blanc's security protocol had transformed into a death sentence for dozens of young workers. The New York community had trusted businessmen like Blanc and Harris to provide safe jobs and opportunities for progress for immigrants. Triangle was seen as an example of American industrial success, a place where young women could earn an honest living and contribute to their families. But as Frances watched flames consume the 9th floor and saw the first victims appear at windows, she understood that this trust had been betrayed in the most brutal way possible. The same men who presented themselves as benefactors of the immigrant community had created the conditions that transformed a workplace into a death trap. The fire continued to spread, and the true horror was just beginning. So now tell me, what do you think should have been done differently at that moment? How do you imagine authorities should have reacted to this situation? While flames consumed the upper floors of the Ash building, Frances Perkins began to do something that would define the rest of her career. She began to systematically document everything she was witnessing. With a small notebook she always carried and a pencil, she recorded times, observations, and details that would become crucial for understanding not just what happened, but why it happened. Frances positioned herself strategically at the corner of Green Street and Washington Place, from where she had a clear view of 3 sides of the building. She began to time events, record flame behavior, and most importantly, document the systematic failures that revealed themselves with each passing minute. 4:47 p.m., dense smoke coming from 8th floor windows, no sign of organized evacuation. 4:52 p.m., flames visible on 9th floor, workers appear at windows but cannot exit, fire escapes empty. 4:55 p.m., first victim jumps from window, crowd screams, firefighters haven't arrived yet. 4:58 p.m., more jumps, counted 6 so far. Where are the emergency procedures? As the tragedy unfolded, Frances identified a terrible pattern that revealed the extent of Triangle's negligence. The victims weren't randomly distributed. They followed a specific pattern that reflected systematic safety failures. Mainly 9th floor workers, young immigrants between 16 and 25 years old were affected. Older victims and the few men who worked at the factory escaped in greater proportion, suggesting they knew alternative routes or had access to information not shared with younger workers. Most fatalities happened between 4:55 and 5:10 p.m., a period of only 15 minutes. This indicated the problem wasn't the speed of the fire itself, but the impossibility of quick evacuation due to physical and procedural barriers. Frances recorded that victims died in 3 main ways: burned inside the building, by asphyxiation due to smoke, or by trauma when jumping from windows. Crucially, she noted that many who jumped did so in groups, suggesting they were being pushed by panic and flames, not by individual choice. When the New York Fire Department finally arrived at 5:02 p.m., Frances observed with horror that their equipment was inadequate for the situation. Firefighter ladders reached only the 6th floor, leaving 3 floors completely inaccessible. Safety nets designed for jumps from lower heights tore with the impact of bodies falling from the 9th floor. Frances recorded, "Firefighters arrived 15 minutes after start. Inadequate equipment. Ladders too low. Nets useless. City emergency system completely failed." Captain Howard Roach, operation commander, later admitted that the department wasn't prepared for fires in tall buildings. New York safety regulations didn't require equipment capable of reaching floors higher than the 6th, a fatal gap that was revealed that day. While documenting the tragedy, Francis began to perceive that crucial information was being deliberately concealed. Max Planck and Isaac Harris had disappeared from the scene, and no Triangle representative was present to explain emergency procedures or provide information about the number of people in the building. Francis decided she needed to access what she called the core of the secret, Triangle's records and documents that would reveal the true extent of negligence. She knew these documents would be in the 10th floor offices, but also knew that Planck and Harris would do everything to protect them. During the weeks following the fire, Francis developed a meticulous data collection system that would become a model for future labor investigations. She divided her investigation into several categories. Francis collected detailed information about each of the 146 victims: names, ages, countries of origin, time working at Triangle, salaries, and specific circumstances of their deaths. She discovered that 123 were women and 23 were men with ages between 14 and 48 years. She systematically catalogued all safety violations that contributed to the tragedy: locked doors, blocked stairs, absence of functioning sprinklers, lack of emergency training, and inadequacy of safety equipment. Francis tracked specific decisions made by Planck and Harris that created conditions for the tragedy, including the security protocol implemented on the day of the fire. She documented the tragedy's impact on victims' families, many of whom lost their only income providers. 3 weeks after the fire, Francis gained access to Triangle's internal documents through a former employee who had survived. These documents revealed a systematic pattern of negligence that went far beyond what had been reported in the press. Internal logs showed that Planck and Harris had known for months that the sprinkler system was defective, but delayed repairs to avoid production interruptions. The company had received multiple warnings from the fire department about blocked emergency stairs, but ignored all of them. The security protocol that resulted in locked doors had been implemented after the company discovered it was losing about $50 per week in small fabric thefts. Triangle had deliberately hired young immigrant workers because they were less likely to question dangerous working conditions or organize into unions. Francis discovered that Triangle wasn't an isolated case, but part of a broader pattern of negligence in New York's textile industry. She identified at least 12 other factories that maintained similar practices of door locking, emergency exit blocking, and safety equipment negligence. Even more disturbing, she discovered that municipal authorities were aware of these practices, but turned a blind eye in exchange for political contributions and promises of job maintenance. New York's building department had inspected the Ash building just 6 months before the fire and approved its safety conditions, despite obvious violations. As her investigation deepened, Francis mapped a complex network of complicity that included municipal inspectors who received bribes to approve buildings with safety violations, local politicians who blocked labor safety legislation in exchange for financial support from businessmen like Planck and Harris, business press who minimized reports about dangerous working conditions to maintain good relations with advertisers, and business associations who lobbied against safety regulations, arguing they would harm American competitiveness. Francis discovered that Planck maintained a secret archive in his private office containing correspondence that revealed the extent of his awareness about safety risks. A letter dated January 1911, 2 months before the fire, showed Planck discussing with Harris the need to maintain total control over worker movement and eliminate all opportunities for material loss. Another letter from February 1911 showed Planck rejecting a proposal to install a fire alarm system, arguing that the cost isn't justified for the type of worker we employ. Planck and Harris, through their lawyers, did everything to prevent Francis and other investigators from accessing Triangle's complete records. They claimed the documents contained trade secrets and that their disclosure would harm the company's ability to compete in the market. When Francis tried to obtain a court order to access complete files, she discovered that Triangle's lawyers had removed crucial documents from the Ash building the night after the fire. Witnesses reported seeing trucks loading boxes of documents to unknown locations. The documentation system developed by Frances Perkins during her investigation of the Triangle fire would become the model for future labor safety investigations. Her meticulous approach and her refusal to accept superficial explanations established a new standard for corporate accountability. More importantly, her documentation preserved not just the facts of the tragedy, but also the individual stories of the 146 victims, ensuring they wouldn't be forgotten as mere statistics, but remembered as human beings with names, dreams, and families who were betrayed by a system that valued profit above life. On April 15, 1911, 3 weeks after the tragedy, Frances Perkins finally gained access to what she had been seeking since the first day: Max Planck's personal archive, hidden in a safe on the 10th floor of the Ash Building. The discovery happened through Samuel Bernstein, the supervisor who had locked the fatal door on the day of the fire and who, consumed by guilt, decided to cooperate with investigations. Bernstein revealed to Frances the location of a hidden safe behind a false panel in Planck's office. "He kept everything there that he didn't want anyone to see," said Bernstein, his hands still trembling weeks after the tragedy. Documents, correspondence, financial records, everything that proved they knew exactly what they were doing. When Frances opened the safe, with the help of a locksmith and in the presence of a court officer, she found a collection of documents that revealed the shocking extent of premeditation behind the conditions that caused the tragedy. The archive contained a 47-page document written by Planck himself, detailing methods to maximize productivity through physical and psychological control of employees. The manual included specific instructions on when and how to lock doors, how to position supervisors to monitor early escape attempts, and methods to discourage union organization. Letters exchanged between Planck and owners of at least 15 other textile factories, sharing best practices for worker control. A letter from December 1910 showed Planck boasting, "Our locked door system reduced theft losses by 78% and completely eliminated unauthorized exits." Copies of 3 safety inspection reports that had been officially lost by municipal archives. These reports, dated 1909 and 1910, listed 23 serious safety violations at Triangle, including systematic blocking of emergency exits and absence of evacuation procedures. The most shocking document of all, a detailed plan on how to protect company assets in case of significant industrial accidents. The protocol included instructions for immediate removal of incriminating documents, transfer of funds to offshore accounts, and public relations strategies to minimize legal responsibility. But the most devastating discovery was an insurance policy dated January 1911, just 2 months before the fire. Planck and Harris had significantly increased Triangle's insurance coverage, specifically for fire damage and equipment loss. The policy value was $119,750, an astronomical amount for the time. Even more sinister, Frances found correspondence between Planck and the insurer discussing hypothetical total loss scenarios and calculating the net financial benefits of different types of accidents. A letter from Planck to the insurance agent dated March 10, 1911, just 15 days before the fire, said, "I confirm our interest in maximizing coverage for catastrophic events. As discussed, our current operation presents significant risks that justify this additional protection." At the bottom of the safe, Frances found what she would later call the Manifesto of Greed, a handwritten document by Planck, apparently intended to be a speech for a business meeting. The document revealed the philosophy that had guided Triangle's fatal decisions. The immigrant worker represents America's most abundant and renewable resource. They arrive daily by the thousands, desperate for work, willing to accept any condition. Our responsibility as businessmen is not to protect them, but to utilize them in the most efficient way possible. Sentimentalism about working conditions is a luxury we cannot afford in a competitive market. Safety regulations are artificial obstacles to efficiency. A worker who knows they can leave at any time is a worker who isn't fully committed to their task. Physical control of the work environment is essential for productivity control. The documents also revealed an extensive corruption network involving municipal officials, safety inspectors, and local politicians. Frances found receipts for regular payments to at least 12 public officials, including $500 monthly to Chief Building Inspector James Morrison, $200 monthly to 3 safety inspectors, $1,000 quarterly to Councilman Patrick O'Sullivan, Chairman of the Labor Safety Commission, and one-time payments totaling $5,000 to facilitate license approvals. When Frances made her discoveries public at a press conference on April 20th, Max Blanc's reaction was immediate and revealing. Instead of denying accusations or expressing remorse for victims, Blanc personally attacked Francis and questioned her authority to investigate private business matters. In an interview with the New York Times, Blanc declared, "Miss Perkins is a socialist agitator who doesn't understand the realities of American business. The documents she claims to have found are fabrications intended to destroy honest businessmen who have provided jobs for thousands of immigrants." Even more revealing, Blanc threatened to sue Francis for private property invasion and commercial defamation, a reaction that only confirmed the authenticity of the found documents. On the night of April 21st, one day after the document revelation, Max Blanc and Isaac Harris disappeared from New York. Witnesses saw them boarding a night train to Chicago, carrying several suitcases and accompanied by lawyers. Before leaving, Blanc activated his financial emergency protocol. Triangle employees worked all night removing valuable equipment from the Ash Building and transferring company funds to banks in other cities. When authorities arrived to seize Triangle assets the next morning, they found only old sewing machines and worthless office furniture. The revelation of documents from Blanc's safe caused a shockwave that spread far beyond New York. Newspapers across the country published headlines like "The Greed That Killed 146" and "The Price of Profit, Human Lives." More importantly, the revelations catalyzed a fundamental change in public opinion about corporate responsibility. For the first time, the American public saw documented evidence that an industrial tragedy hadn't been an accident, but the direct result of conscious decisions made by businessmen who prioritized profit over human safety. Francis's revelations triggered the largest popular mobilization for workers' rights in American history, up to that point. On April 25th, more than 100,000 people participated in a silent march through New York streets, carrying signs with the names of the 146 victims and demanding justice. The march was organized by a coalition of unions, immigrant organizations, and women's rights groups united by indignation caused by the revelations. Francis Perkins walked in the front line, carrying a sign that read, "They knew, they chose, they killed." The climax of Francis's investigation wasn't just the discovery of documents, but the understanding that the Triangle tragedy represented something much larger than the negligence of two businessmen. It was the revelation of an entire system built on exploitation and contempt for human life. While reading documents from Blanc's safe, Francis understood that her mission had changed. It was no longer just about documenting a tragedy, but using this documentation to fundamentally transform the relationship between employers and workers in America. The 146 Triangle victims hadn't died in vain if their deaths could catalyze changes that would protect millions of other workers. And with documents from Blanc's safe in her hands, Francis Perkins had the necessary tools to do exactly that. The trial of Max Blanc and Isaac Harris began in December 1911, 9 months after the tragedy. Despite overwhelming evidence collected by Francis Perkins and other investigators, the result was a bitter lesson about the limitations of the American judicial system when confronted with corporate power. Blanc and Harris were charged with manslaughter, but their lawyers, a team of 12 of New York's best criminal attorneys, built a defense based on legal technicalities and the claim that the owners had no direct knowledge of the specific conditions that caused the deaths. The jury, composed entirely of white middle-class men, many of whom were small business owners, acquitted Blanc and Harris of all criminal charges. The verdict was read on December 27, 1911, in a courtroom filled with victims' family members who burst into tears and cries of indignation. Although they escaped prison, Blanc and Harris faced multiple civil lawsuits from victims' families. In the end, they were forced to pay compensations totaling $75 per victim, a paltry amount that didn't even cover funeral costs. Ironically, Blanc and Harris received $199,750 from their insurer for the fire, exactly the amount they had insured 2 months before the tragedy. After paying compensations and legal costs, they still profited approximately $145,000 from the death of 146 people. The experience of investigating the Triangle tragedy transformed Francis Perkins from a relatively obscure social reformer into the most powerful voice for American workers' rights. In 1913, she was appointed to the New York State Industrial Safety Commission, where she led the creation of the most comprehensive labor laws of the era. Frances never forgot what she had witnessed that March afternoon in 1911. She carried with her a list with the names of the 146 victims and frequently consulted it when facing political resistance to her reform proposals. These names, she would say, are the reason we cannot accept compromises when it comes to workplace safety. The revelations about Triangle catalyzed a wave of labor reforms that fundamentally transformed American laws. The Industrial Safety Act of 1913 established mandatory standards for emergency exits, sprinkler systems, and safety training. The Workers' Compensation Act of 1914 created a compensation system for families of workplace accident victims. The Factory Inspection Act of 1915 established a body of independent inspectors with power to close factories violating safety standards. The Child Labor Act of 1916 prohibited employment of minors under 16 in factories and established minimum educational standards. In 1933, President Franklin D. Roosevelt appointed Frances Perkins as Secretary of Labor, making her the first woman to hold a cabinet position in American government. At her swearing-in ceremony, she wore a brooch with 146 small pearls, one for each Triangle victim. As Secretary of Labor, Frances led the creation of the Social Security system, minimum wage laws, and occupational safety regulations that protect millions of American workers to this day. Each of these achievements was, in her words, a tribute to the 146 souls we lost at Triangle. Max Planck never showed remorse for the Triangle deaths. After the trial, he and Harris reopened a new textile factory in another Manhattan building, maintaining many of the same dangerous practices that had caused the original tragedy. In 1913, Planck was fined $20 for again locking emergency exits in his new factory, a fine smaller than the cost of a dress produced by his workers. Isaac Harris, apparently more affected by the tragedy, gradually withdrew from the textile business. He sold his stake in the company in 1918 and moved to California, where he died in relative anonymity in 1954. Planck continued in the textile business until his death in 1942, always refusing to publicly discuss the events of March 25, 1911. Frances Perkins dedicated decades of her life to preserving the individual memory of each Triangle victim. She collected photographs, family stories, and interrupted dreams, creating an archive that humanized the tragedy's statistics. Among the names she never forgot were Rose Friedman, 18 years old, from Ukraine, who sent half her salary to bring her brothers to America. She was found near the locked door of the 9th floor, her hands still holding the handle. Catherine Maltese, 39 years old, Italian widow with 2 small children. She jumped from the 9th floor window, holding the hand of her daughter Lucia, 20 years old. Both died on impact. Daisy Lopez Fitze, 18 years old, born in New York to Puerto Rican parents. She had just graduated from high school and worked at Triangle to save money for college. Her body was identified only by her graduation ring. Samuel Rosen, 17 years old, Russian Jew, who supported his sick mother and 3 younger brothers. He died trying to help other workers escape, being found near the blocked west staircase. The Triangle tragedy and Frances Perkins's subsequent revelations marked a turning point in American consciousness about workers' rights. For the first time, the public understood that industrial accidents weren't inevitable acts of God, but direct consequences of conscious business decisions. Press coverage changed dramatically. Newspapers that previously portrayed strikes as socialist agitation began investigating working conditions and supporting labor reforms. The New York World, for example, launched a 6-month investigative series on dangerous factories throughout the city, resulting in the closure of 47 establishments violating basic safety standards. The Triangle tragedy galvanized the American Union movement in a way that decades of organizing hadn't achieved. The International Ladies Garment Workers Union saw its membership grow from 58,000 to 250,000 members between 1911 and 1915. More importantly, the tragedy changed public perception about unions. Organizations previously seen as foreign agitators came to be recognized as legitimate defenders of worker safety. The phrase "Remember Triangle" became a battle cry for union organizers across the country. The tragedy also revolutionized industrial building design. New York's building code was completely rewritten in 1916, establishing standards that became a national model. Multiple emergency exits on each floor, fire escapes with direct access to street level, mandatory sprinkler systems in all industrial buildings, doors that open outward and can never be locked during working hours, emergency lighting and exit signage, and mandatory evacuation training for all employees. Triangle's impact extended far beyond American borders. Industrialized countries in Europe studied reforms implemented in the United States and adapted similar legislation. Britain passed the Factory Act of 1916, directly inspired by post-Triangle reforms. Germany, France, and other European countries followed with their own versions of industrial safety laws. Frances Perkins frequently reflected on the broader lessons of the Triangle tragedy. In a 1941 speech on the 30th anniversary of the tragedy, she said, "Triangle taught us that government regulation is not the enemy of the free market, but its guardian. An economic system that allows businessmen to profit from worker deaths is not free. It is savage. True economic freedom only exists when all market participants operate under fair rules that protect human dignity." In 1961, on the 50th anniversary of the tragedy, a memorial was inaugurated at the site where the Ash Building once stood. But Frances Perkins insisted that the true memorial to Triangle victims wasn't statues or plaques, but the laws and institutions their deaths had inspired. "Every worker who comes home safe at the end of the day," she said at the inauguration ceremony, "every family that receives compensation for a workplace accident, every child who goes to school instead of working in a factory, these are the true monuments to the 146 souls we lost." The story of the Triangle Shirtwaist factory serves as a permanent reminder that social progress isn't inevitable, but the result of constant vigilance and the courage of individuals willing to confront systemic injustices. Frances Perkins dedicated her life to ensuring that the 146 Triangle victims didn't die in vain. Through her meticulous investigation, tireless advocacy, and political leadership, she transformed a tragedy into a catalyst for changes that protected millions of workers. Triangle's most important lesson isn't just about workplace safety, but about the moral responsibility we all have to protect the most vulnerable in our society. When systems fail and authorities omit themselves, it falls to courageous individuals like Frances Perkins to stand up and demand justice. The 146 victims of the Triangle Shirtwaist factory died, but their names and stories live on through the laws, institutions, and principles their deaths inspired. They are truly the names that fire could not erase. Today, more than a century later, the Triangle story remains relevant. In a world where workers still face dangerous conditions, where the pursuit of profit sometimes overrides safety considerations, and where regulatory vigilance can be relaxed in the name of economic efficiency, Triangle's lessons remain vital. Frances Perkins's courage in documenting the truth, confronting established power, and fighting for systemic changes serves as inspiration for all who refuse to accept injustices as inevitable. Her life demonstrates that determined individuals can indeed change the course of history. The 146 Triangle victims deserve to be remembered not just as victims, but as catalysts for a transformation that made America a more just and safe country for all workers. Their names, preserved in memory and law, continue to echo through time, reminding us that human dignity must always prevail over profit. Now tell me, what did you think of this story? How did it make you reflect on the importance of workers' rights and social vigilance? Leave your comment, and if this story touched you the same way it has touched millions of people over more than a century, consider subscribing to the channel for more stories that reveal how past events continue to shape our present. Remember, history isn't just about what happened, but about the lessons we carry into the future. The 146 victims of the Triangle Shirtwaist factory left us a legacy of vigilance, courage, and determination that remains relevant today.